My name is Joy Alice Eisenhower. I'm the Director for Arts and Culture at the Boulder JCC, and we are so delighted to have you here today with us for our Lunch and Learn. Before we introduce our speaker, I just want to orientate you a little bit to our virtual call today. You all will be muted as we begin. But if you have any questions throughout the presentation, you can enter them into the chat bar privately to me or to share with everyone, and we'll try to answer as many questions as possible. Stu Dolmanick, our ACE committee representative, and I will be here afterwards if you have any questions, or if you just want to stay on and say hi for a bit. And now I am so delighted to welcome our speaker today, Rosie Briggs. She is a community campaigns and eco leader manager for EcoCycle, Boulder County's local recycler and environmental nonprofit. She manages, trains, and leads programs for a network of over 1,000 zero waste sustainability advocates. We call them eco leaders. And in addition to creating and giving monthly public presentations and general outreach, she loves honeybees and hates single-use plastic. Thank you so much for being here with us today, Rosie.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited. I love doing anything with the JCC, so I'm really glad to be here. All right, should I get started? Okay, great. I will go ahead and share my screen then. Bear with me for just one moment. Okay. Great. Can everyone see my screen? It's all good? Okay, great. Well, again, thank you for having me. Let me know if my environment is a little bit too loud. I'm outside because that's where the Wi-Fi works best. But I may have to turn my video off if I start freezing, and you'll still hear my voice and see a little picture of me. So today I'm just going to talk about zero waste in general, how it relates to the current climate crisis, and then specifically talk about what goes where in Boulder County. So what you can recycle, what you can compost, what can go to the charm, and what to definitely keep out of those bins. And then I hope to have plenty of time for questions. I love, if you hold up pieces of trash or things like that, and I will let you know where they go. So we're just going to jump right in. When we talk about zero waste, I think it's really important to connect it to our current climate situation. So I think a lot of people will hear very kind of big picture statistics and have very big picture worries about the climate crisis. We'll hear things like gigatons of carbon in the atmosphere, and those are really big ideas. And it's really important to connect that to more tangible solutions, because often when we're talking about zero waste, if someone is really kind of beginning to worry about the climate crisis, zero waste, things like recycling and composting may seem like a small thing to focus on, when really it's very tied into the climate crisis, and it's a very tangible way to participate in an actual solution for the climate and for our planet. So I'm just going to first talk about why zero waste matters when we talk about climate. So the first statistic that I always share is from the EPA, and it says that 42% of all of our greenhouse gas emissions comes from what we call consumption emissions. So that just means the footprint of our stuff. So it's how we're mining, how we're producing, how we're consuming and disposing of all of our stuff. So not just, bottles and cans, but things like computers and clothing and cars and things like that. So obviously, when we are looking at, like I said, each part of that process for all of our stuff, there's overlap with other sectors. So like transportation and manufacturing, for example. But the big idea here is that if we're not looking at our stuff, if we're only looking at like cars and energy, and we're not examining our consumption, then our consumption of specifically materials, not just things like energy, then we're missing almost half of the source of our greenhouse gas emissions. So we really have to take a good hard look at our materials and how we're consuming them, how we're disposing of them, how we're making them. So zero waste does not only deal with where does something go at the end of its lifetime, in terms of what bin, but it really deals with why we're consuming them in the first place, how they're being made, at what rate we're consuming them, can we do something to avoid them before they turn into something that we then have to put in the bin? So that's the upstream impact. I did give a whole webinar about that back in April, and I can send the link to Joy Alice just in case she wants to share it out. But aluminum is kind of the poster child for the upstream impacts of materials. So again, a lot of times when we buy, a Coca-Cola can, we'll drink that Coca-Cola and then we'll figure out where to put it, whether it's the recycling or the trash, or some people just throw it out their car window. But really the bigger impact of that Coca-Cola can comes way upstream when it's being made. So aluminum, for example, in order to make aluminum, we have to go down into the rainforest, we have to clear cut the rainforest, and then we have to mine for bauxite, which we strip mine. We kind of take off a whole layer of earth in order to get to that bauxite in the earth, and we have to go into the tropical rainforest usually because that's where rock has eroded into bauxite, and then we have to send it all the way up to Iceland, and then in Iceland there's this incredibly energy and heat intensive process to turn that bauxite into alumina, and then turn that alumina into aluminum, and then we put that aluminum all over we send it all over the earth where we're consuming it. And so when we think about that huge impact that all of that process that it took to make that aluminum can, and we think about then drinking out of it for 2 seconds and then throwing it in the trash and literally burying it in a landfill and then doing all of that process again, that is just an insane thing to do. That just doesn't make any logical sense, whether or not you care about the polar bears or the tropical rainforest or any of that. So aluminum is kind of the poster child of that upstream impact versus downstream. We can just skip all of that upstream if we just recycle that aluminum can. Once you have aluminum, you can keep turning it into a can over and over again, and you don't have to cut down the rainforest anymore. So I think it's just important when we're talking about zero waste and thinking about our stuff to expand kind of our view of our can beyond just the bin that it goes into, and think about where it came from in the first place, because that's a really kind of invisible piece of the process in the life cycle for most people. And then compost I will talk about later. Compost has a huge climate impact. Currently, organic materials can be a big climate problem, and they could be a big climate solution if we really work on compost infrastructure. And then zero waste is one of the fastest and cheapest ways to mitigate climate change. So it's we can do it today. Like we can work on zero waste infrastructure and solutions today. It's not like the infrastructure already exists for the most part, and if we are all just participating well and putting the financial and kind of political responsibilities on the right people, so not the consumers but usually the producers, then that's something that we can move forward with in the very short term. And it's just a really tangible thing. If we're talking about environmental advocacy, it's hard to, I've worked in a bunch of different fields in environmental advocacy, and it's sometimes hard to talk to just anyone about, installing solar on their roofs or, buying a hybrid, things like that. But trash and waste is such a tangible thing that all of us deal with every day. So we can all be part of the solution all the time. And we could be diverting about 80% of our current waste stream. So just with our existing infrastructure. So we don't even have to really, invest in a bunch of new machines or facilities or anything. Like just with our existing society, we could be diverting 80% of our stuff. So we can do better. So part of the reason that recycling is often really hard is because recycling guidelines change from place to place. So we have our recycling guidelines here in Boulder County, but if you go to even Denver, they're going to look a little bit different. If you go to Texas, they're going to look very different. If you go to Europe, they're going to look very different. And so that's, we often get the feedback that it would be easier if we just had a big, universal set of guidelines. And we agree that would be easier. We would love that. But the issue is that what makes something recyclable is determined by basically 4 things. So the big 2 are whether there's a market and whether there's infrastructure for the item. So whether there's facilities. So facilities could be as simple as like, are there trucks? Is there a drop-off center? Is there any type of recycling infrastructure? But it could also be at the existing recycling facility. Do they have, what sort of technology do they have? Are they hand sorting? Do we have lasers? Do we have magnets? How well are we sorting those materials? And then whether there's a market, is there somebody that actually wants to buy that material to turn it into something new? And what are the needs of that market? If at the recycling facility, we can't sort to meet the demands of that market, then we can't sell our materials to that market. So here in Boulder County, EcoCycle is your local recycler, like Joy said. So EcoCycle, we have been around since 1976. We were a grassroots organization that just has existed ever since 1976. So it's people that just started a curbside recycling program, one of the very first in the country here in Boulder. And ever since, EcoCycle has been the recycler for the county. So the county built our Boulder County recycling facility with the taxpayers' money and support. And then EcoCycle is the organization contracted to actually run it. So we're the people actually in the facility sorting your stuff. So anytime you put anything into a recycling bin around Boulder County, whether it's in a business, in your home, in your multifamily complex, it will come to our facility, and that's where we sort, you know, number one plastics from aluminum, from cardboard, from office pack paper. And then from there, each thing goes to their respective markets. So that's what's going on here. And then whether we can meet the market's needs with the technology at our facilities kind of ties in with number two. And then number four is kind of an extra credit kind of factor here in whether something is recyclable. And it really is specific to Boulder County. So like I said, EcoCycle is a nonprofit and we do your recycling, and that's really unique. So there's only 4 nonprofit recyclers in the whole country. And we are one of them. And usually, you know, whoever does your recycling is usually kind of a big for-profit, usually a landfill company like Waste Management is a classic recycler. So here in Boulder County, the fact that we're a mission-based environmental nonprofit changes things a little bit. So we introduced this number 4, which is recyclers' standards or decisions. So for example, if the styrofoam industry comes to us and says, we're going to give you a densifier so that if you get styrofoam cups, then, you know, you can put it in this densifier and we can turn it into something like, you know, building materials or something like that. We're going to say no, because as a mission-based environmental nonprofit, we really disagree with the existence of styrofoam cups. We don't want them to be made anymore because they're so harmful to the environment, not to mention human health. So, you know, we don't want people to think that they're recycling their styrofoam cup. We just want to cut out styrofoam cups. So as a nonprofit in general, we always say, like, you know, recycle all the time, as much as you can with all the stuff that you have, because recycling makes sense. But overall, the more we can reduce and reuse, that's the key. We're not going to recycle our way out of this problem. Okay, so now we can jump right into our actual recycling guidelines. We have, like Joy said, we have a little, like a question box here on Zoom. So we can do that at the end, or if a question pops up, someone can interrupt me. But I might get to it later on. So I'm just gonna kind of run through our guidelines. So we're gonna start with paper and cardboard. So here in Boulder County, we do have a single stream system, like most places at this point. And that just means that all of your recycling can go into one bin, and then we sort it out on our end. So in the past, it was like in your own house, you had to have a bin for newspapers and a bin for glass, etc. And now we can put it all in one bin because our facility is equipped to actually sort one thing from another. So paper and cardboard is the category that people kind of understand for the most part at this point. So most things, you know, that you'd get in the mail, that you'd use in an office, that you'd use in a school are recyclable in terms of paper and cardboard. So rather than talk about the types of paper and cardboard that we can accept, I usually talk about the types of paper and cardboard that we cannot accept in the recycling. Just because it doesn't take as long. So paper recycling, it kind of, it's not cyclical like you might think recycling is across the board. Paper is more like bloop, 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 bloop. So paper, if it starts out as something really durable like corrugated cardboard, the fibers in that paper product are really long and really kind of strong. And every time we recycle that paper product, I call it a paper smoothie. Like in the paper recycling facility, they whip it all up into their big paper smoothie. And every time that happens to a paper product, the fibers get cut shorter and shorter, and that product becomes less durable the more lifetimes it has. So it can usually be recycled maybe 5 to 7 times. But once it hits a low grade category, that means that it's time to retire from recycling, and those guys have to go in the compost rather than the recycling. So that low grade category can't be recycled, but it's stuff like paper towels, paper napkins, tissues, toilet paper. Those things that, you know, if you got them wet, they would just fall apart right away. If you were to ball them up, they wouldn't crunch. That's how I usually describe how to tell whether a paper is low grade. So if you balled it up and it doesn't crunch, that means that it doesn't have enough kind of durability to be turned back into anything else. It's retiring from recycling, but it's still made of a tree and it's not covered in plastic, those products that I mentioned, so it can go in the compost at that point. But you know, people love to recycle paper towels, for example, because it has the word paper in it, but it's just not strong enough to get turned into anything else. The other category of paper products that we don't like in the recycling are those food grade paper products. So anytime something looks like paper or cardboard, but it's designed to directly hold food or liquid, with the exception of a carton, which I'll talk about in a minute. You can see there's a juice carton below. Anytime we have like a coffee cup, for example, like a paper coffee cup, people love to recycle those because they look like paper. But if it looks like paper and it's doing a good job of holding your hot coffee, it's not doing a good job of being paper anymore because it's mostly plastic at that point. Because of course paper couldn't hold, you know, your big bowl of noodles or your hot coffee or your smoothie. So things like a paper coffee cup, like a soda cup, you know, Chinese food takeout, that sort of thing. If it's holding food or liquid directly, it's usually covered in a bunch of plastic and we can't take it in the recycling. And I'll talk about the compostable versions of those products later. But for the most part, they have to go in the trash. The other type of paper that we don't want is a receipt. So that's a big one. People really want to recycle receipts, and I understand because we see them all the time. So the two issues with receipts are, number one, they're usually covered in BPA, which is not great environmentally. It's also not great for the folks who have to touch receipts all day long, who are cashiers, but also they have that thermal coating. So, you know, if you get kind of grease on your receipt or water or something, it will react differently than a regular piece of paper. You can tell that it's like glossy and shiny. So it's that thermal coating specifically that they put on receipts that renders it unrecyclable. So the more you can kind of skip the receipt, the better. And then the last type of paper that we don't want in the recycling is a very tiny, tiny piece of paper. And I'll talk about the reason for that in a moment when I talk about glass. But something like shredded paper, like when you put paper through a shredder, those little pieces are too small to go through our facility, and they'll just like fall through the cracks and make paper mache and gum up the works. So we don't want them just to go loose into the paper recycling or the regular recycling. And we want to, you can compost it if there's no plastic in it. You can drop it off at the Boulder County Recycling Center or at the CHARM, the Center for Hard to Recycle Materials, which we also run. But for the most part, the more you can not shred, that's the best thing to do, just because every time you shred, even though it's fun, you skip a bunch of lives for that piece of paper, because you just skip ahead and cut the fibers in advance. So, you know, the more you can kind of redact or like only shred things that you absolutely have to, that's the best thing to do. So let's see. So in our facility, we have a big dumping floor. So all of the trucks that are bringing recycling from all over the place, whether they're Western or Waste Management or Republic or EcoCycle or City of Longmont, whatever it is, whatever your truck says on it, it's still coming to us as long as it's in Boulder County. So all those trucks are dumping all their recyclables onto our tipping floor, and then we're taking those recyclables and putting them onto a big conveyor belt, and then it leads into our facility where our actual people work. So the first thing that we have to do is get out the glass, because we have all these real people standing in our facility in front of our conveyor belts, and they're grabbing stuff and they're sorting stuff and they're grabbing off contaminants. And if we have glass in there, of course, we're just going to cut our hands right away. So we had to get out the glass. So before anybody touches it, all of the recyclables go over these rotating gears, and I call them ninja stars. They're like these sharp little wheels that are kind of like just grinding. And the glass is on the bottom of the materials because it's heavy. So the glass gets ground up by these ninja stars. We break it on purpose into little kind of shards, and then everything passes over a 2-inch crack, and we call it the fine screen. So that 2-inch crack is there so that the glass pieces will on purpose fall through that crack because we just ground it up, and then everything else is supposed to pass over it. So that's the way that we get out the glass. So you can see, you know, when I was talking about shredded paper, that if you put in your tiny little shred of paper or, you know, a tiny little plastic cap, then that's going to fall through and then contaminate the glass stream. So the smallest that you want to go with pretty much anything that you put in the recycling by itself is 2 inches, because that's how big that crack is. And I know I'm giving you a lot of information, but often if you kind of understand better, you know, the mechanisms behind what is a yes and what is a no in the recycling, it helps you remember and helps you tell other people. And we give tours all the time too. So when we can meet in person again, I would love to give a JCC tour of the BCRC. So we have that glass crack. So that's how the glass gets out. And then everything else comes into the facility where we're all working and sorting and pulling things off. So the next thing that has to happen is that paper goes in one direction and containers go in the other direction. So everything goes over these, they're called mountain climbers. They're like these big rubber wheels that are doing this. And if you are something that's light and flat, like a piece of paper, you're gonna float to the top and go on a paper conveyor belt. And if you're something that's 3-dimensional and heavier, like a container, you're gonna go jumble around in the middle for a minute and then go on the container conveyor belt. So we have papers, containers. The papers, people then sort by hand. So we have people that are like, you know, newspaper, magazine, office pack, paperboard, cardboard, and they're sorting it by grade by hand. And then on the container side, we already got out glass. So glass recycling is great in Colorado. So glass inherently is a really good recyclable material in that you can melt it down and turn it back into whatever it was without it losing quality infinitely. You can do it as many times as you want. And that's different than a lot of other materials like plastic when I get to plastic. But the main obstacle with glass is that facilities and markets piece that I was discussing just a slide ago. So even though glass as a material is great at being recycled, if it's not close enough to a market, it can't be recycled because it's so heavy. So even when we go into like our mountain towns, often you'll see that glass recycling isn't available because it's so heavy that they can't truck it all the way down to a facility. So here in Boulder County, we've worked really hard to get a local glass recycler. It's called Momentum, and that's the company of the glass recycler. And they were previously in Utah, and we kind of, along with other people, kind of coaxed them to have a location in Broomfield. So now when you recycle your glass, you can put it in the bin, it'll come to us, we'll sort it out with our Ninja Stars and put it through the crack, and then we'll send it to Momentum, and they sort it by color. They have all these lasers, and they take out contaminants like shredded paper. And then they'll send it to one of the local bottlers. So like Rocky Mountain Bottling, Coors, for example. And then that new bottle can be back on the shelves just in a couple of weeks. You don't have to worry about labels when it comes to any of these recycling. Like labels and stickers are always fine. We don't expect you to take those off. It's really hard unless you want to like reuse the jar for yourself. This jar you can see has a little metal lid. We would love for you to take that metal lid off and then recycle those two separately. So we can get the lid with our magnet, because that lid is usually made of steel, but we don't want it to be attached to the glass because we have to put them in different places, and we can't get in there and unscrew the top. So then speaking of steel, we also have this aerosol can here, which is usually steel, along with some cans, like soup cans are often steel, bean cans, things like that. So we have a magnet to get off steel, to get that off of the line. The aerosol can, you can keep the little tiny plastic cap on the very top of that, like the little spray top, just because it's hard and kind of dangerous to get it off. But if it has that bigger, like clunkier plastic top that goes over that, go ahead and separate that and recycle them separately. With aerosol cans, just make sure it's not something super hazardous. If it's like half full of, you know, spray paint or something, bring it to the hazardous materials management facility instead, which is right behind the recycling center. But they'll take like batteries and light bulbs and paint and pesticides, things like that. And then cartons is a weird one, because if you're a critically thinking recycler, you would look at a carton and think, well, it's made of a bunch of different stuff all squished together. So usually when we have a bunch of stuff all squished together that's different materials, we can't put it in the recycling, because in the recycling facility, we're sorting, you know, product from product, like material from material. And if there's multiple materials in a single product, in a single piece of packaging, it's not like we can peel apart, you know, different layers in our facility. That's not what we're built to do. So usually those kinds of products have to go in the trash. An example of that is like an oatmeal container. You know, those like canister ones where it's kind of looks like cardboard, but there's plastic and there's a plastic lid and an aluminum bottom. So that's an example of something that we can't take in the recycling for that reason. Cartons used to be that way, but then the carton manufacturers themselves started taking responsibility for the recycling of their own product, which, what an idea. Everyone should be doing that. So Tetra Pak is the kind of industry umbrella that makes all of these cartons. So, you know, your juice cartons, your milk cartons, your rice milk cartons, coconut water, you know, those protein cartons, all of that stuff. Pretty much anything you'd call a carton except an ice cream carton. All of those different types of cartons, like a little juice box, whatever, are made by Tetra Pak. So they formed, you can, if you look up the Carton Council, you can learn more, but they formed kind of like a subcommittee in their industry, and they fund the actual recycling of their products. So they fund the outreach for the fact that it is recyclable. They fund for the facilities, for the machinery, and for the markets. So the whole kind of cradle to cradle life cycle of their product. So even though a carton isn't inherently good at being recycled, like something like glass is, that extended producer responsibility makes it feasible, because as the recyclers, we can't pay for that, and we can't, you know, think up machinery and then buy the machinery and then figure out who to sell it to. But if the producer does that, then we can. So if it goes to show that pretty much, you know, if every producer of every product took full responsibility for their own product, really anything could be recycled. And that's what we always push for, is that producer responsibility rather than, you know, the burden falling on the recycler and the consumer. So for these cartons, we just want to make sure, like all containers, that they're just empty. They don't have to be like sparkling clean. Just make sure like all the juice is poured out, or all the juice is, you know, consumed. And then in the case of these cartons, since they're going right back to the people who made them, you can actually keep the little top attached. So whether it's a screw on or that little flap top, you can keep it attached, even though it's like plastic on a carton. And then aluminum is the last one. Aluminum, like glass, is infinitely recyclable, which is great. And it's the one that I talked about that has this huge upstream impact. All of them do, but aluminum specifically. So the more we can recycle aluminum, the better. Every time I see aluminum in a trash can, it just gives me anxiety, because I know how much went into making that aluminum can, and I know how recyclable it is once we have it. So it's not only inherently good at being recycled, it's not only infinitely recyclable, but it's also super lightweight, unlike glass. So it's really easy to send around to local facilities, and for that reason, it's a great thing to recycle. So you can see there's like this little bowl of aluminum. You know, you get like a burrito or Chipotle or whatever in that. Again, just make sure there's not a bunch of food in it. An aluminum can is a great one. Try to make sure that it's just crunched up, or, you know, you can keep it whole, but if you want to give more room in your recycling bin, you can just kind of crunch it down. Just don't fully flatten it, because if you fully flatten it, our machine will think it's paper and it'll sort it with paper. And then for this bean can, whether it's kind of a peel off lid or like a can opener lid, we just kind of want to keep that lid with the can if at all possible. So what I do is like leave a little hinge and then tuck it back in and then squeeze the top. Even if you can't leave a hinge, just try to tuck it back in and squeeze the top, because if the little top goes through by itself, it'll go with the papers, and then it'll probably cut us when we try to sort the papers. And then the last thing is this aluminum sheet, so the aluminum foil. We don't want it in a sheet, because again, if we have it like a sheet of aluminum foil go through the recycling, we're gonna think it's paper. Our machine is gonna sort it as paper. So we want it in a ball. So just like, you know, it doesn't have to be a perfect ball, but just some sort of three-dimensional shape. And we want that three-dimensional shape to be at least 2 inches in diameter. And that's, again, just so that it can make it over that glass crack. So I know this is a lot of like detail, you know, like a ball and 2 inches is like so specific. So don't worry about it if you don't remember it the first time you hear it. But I think kind of having an idea of the mechanisms behind it and the reasons for that makes it a little bit easier to understand why we could take some things and why we can't take others, and, you know, why it's important to make it in a ball rather than flat. So those are our non-plastic containers. And now I'm going to talk about plastic, which is just a whole mess. So plastics are a problem. in general, as many of us know. So as an environmental nonprofit, we are not fans of plastic for many reasons. So upstream, we're not fans of plastic because they're made of oil and gas. And it's kind of astounding how many people don't really make that connection. You know, here in Colorado, we have a lot of fracking activity, and a lot of people have hard opinions on fracking, and they know a lot about fracking, and they're like advocates for anti-fracking or however they feel about it. But they don't necessarily connect that with plastic. And I always say, if you have a hard opinion on fracking and oil and gas and fossil fuels, you have a hard opinion on plastics. It's the same industry, it's the same process, it's just a different end product. So EcoCycle is doing a free screening of the story of plastics. I can send that out as well. And you can just watch it on your own time once you get the link. But it's really interesting. They talk about kind of how the fossil fuel industry is like, oh, people are moving away from fossil fuels as it relates to, you know, things like energy and transportation. So we have to really crank up single-use plastics because we still have to push our product, you know. So for the upstream impacts, we're not fans of plastics. But then and then at the end, the downstream impacts of plastics, we're not fans because plastics never go away. Every piece of plastic that's ever been created still exists in our environment somewhere, whether it's, you know, in our soils, in the water, in our ocean, in our bodies, it still exists. It's not going anywhere. And it's just breaking down into smaller and smaller bits called microplastics, which, you know, are what we're eating in our fish and, you know, what are floating around in our water and in our oceans and things like that. So don't like it downstream. And then in the middle, as recyclers, we're not fans of plastic because it's so hard to know what types of plastics are recycled. And we get that feedback all the time. Like, it's so confusing to know what plastic products are recyclable and what aren't. And we're like, I know, we don't like them and we wish we never saw them again. We don't, we don't want to be dealing with plastics. So as recyclers, when it comes to plastic, again, the burden is falling on us. It's not like the people who are producing it are not dealing with the recycling of plastics. It's just falling on us, and we don't even want it in the first place. So part of the reason that recycling plastics is so confusing is because there's so many different numbers. So every time I see somebody trying to recycle a plastic item, I see them like, you know, looking on the bottom of the product, and they're looking for, you know, a number in this recycling symbol. And I understand why they're looking for that. Because the recycling symbol, why wouldn't it mean recyclable? But the fact is that the recycling symbol is unregulated and it doesn't mean anything really. You can just put it on whatever you want. As a producer, it doesn't mean that it's recyclable or not. So part of that is just kind of greenwashing. And part of it is that even if it was intended to be meaningful, the fact that recycling guidelines change from place to place make that pretty impossible. So again, you know, you can be buying your Mountain Dew bottle, but your Mountain Dew bottle has no idea where you are and whether a Mountain Dew bottle is recyclable in your area, so it really can't tell you. So the symbol really doesn't mean anything, but the number inside is meaningful. There are 7 different numbers, 7 different categories of plastic resins, and they're really more kind of like meant for communication within the industry. So if I make a yogurt tub, then I have to put a number 5 on it because, okay, I made this yogurt tub, I made it out of polypropylene, and so I put a 5 on the bottom because 5 is the code for polypropylene. But it's not like your average person, you know, would get a yogurt tub and be like, polypropylene, now I know exactly which bin to put this in. So the numbers are meaningful in the sense that they do actually correlate with what type of plastic it is, but it doesn't, again, necessarily correlate with whether or not it's recyclable, especially to the lay person who doesn't have, you know, the different resins memorized, understandably. So rather than talk about numbers, because there's a huge variety in which ones are recyclable and which aren't, and even within those categories, some show up in forms that you can recycle and some forms that we can't recycle. So even within, like 5 was the category that I used as an example. So some 5s are recyclable, like a yogurt tub, and some 5s aren't, like a chicken rotisserie bag. So in both cases, you're gonna see a recycling symbol most likely on the product with a 5 in the middle. So we can't take one of them, we can take the other one. So for that reason, we don't talk about numbers at all. But if you as a consumer would like to kind of go above and beyond on plastic numbers, 3s, 6s, and 7s are the ones that we say, please don't even buy those. Like, if you can avoid buying plastic as much as you can, that's great. avoid it as much as you possibly can. But specifically numbers 3, 6, and 7s are the ones that are just like, so we call them crap plastics in the industry. They're just not, they're not marketable. They're not durable. They're super toxic. There's a bunch of associations with human health problems with them. So 3 is PVC, 6 is polystyrene, so styrofoam, like a styrofoam cup. Gross. And then 7 is other. It's like something else. I don't know what it is. Put a 7 on it. So 3, 6, and 7s are the ones like, if you have to buy plastic, please don't buy those ones. So rather than do it by numbers here in Boulder County, we communicate our plastic recycling by literally what is it? What is the product? So bottles, tubs, jugs, and jars is kind of our mantra for plastics recycling here. You know, it's easy enough to remember: bottle, tub, jug, and jar. And it usually means that the bottles, tubs, jugs, and jars are almost always a resin that we can recycle, but also they're in a shape and form and durability that we can sort in our facility and we can market to somebody. So the last issue with plastics recycling is that industry piece that I started to describe. So you can see I have this green bottle over here on my left side of the screen. You know, it's like a soda bottle. That's usually a number 1 plastic. And at this point, so plastic, unlike glass, is not inherently awesome at doing this. It's not great at being turned back into what it was without it losing quality. But at this point, we do have the technology to turn that bottle, this one I'm describing or any other, back into a bottle. So bottle to bottle, like full recycling, up to maybe 6 times. But the issue is that hardly ever happens because, like I said, plastic is made from oil and gas. And oil and gas is so cheap that it makes more sense for them to just keep drilling new oil and gas and making plastics out of virgin oil and gas than it does for them to buy back their post-consumer recycled material and turn it into a bottle. And that's because of subsidies. So again, not only is oil and gas cheap, but they're subsidized to just keep drilling. So if I, you know, am, I'll just go back to aluminum. If I'm an aluminum producer, of course I'm going to buy back post-consumer recycled aluminum to make my new aluminum stuff, because that makes a heck of a lot more sense than, again, going back into the rainforest and then sending it up to Iceland and doing all this stuff over here. It makes more sense for me to just keep buying back my own product. But with plastic, it's not so, because it's cheap, it's subsidized. So we need to, so what ends up happening is that we're just like still cranking out all of these new bottles out of new oil and gas all the time. And then somebody else is like, oh my God, there's so much plastic. Okay, I'll buy it and turn it into a carpet, or, you know, shoes or athletic pants or something like that. That's what usually ends up happening with a bottle. And so it's still linear, right? That carpet still has to go to the landfill at some point, and we're not slowing down our plastic production in the first place. So it's just like, well, like I'm trying to do something in the meantime, but it's still linear. So what we really need to do is, like, first of all, like, turn off the tap of plastics. Like, why are we even making 3, 6, and 7s? But second of all, make requirements for plastics people to buy back their own stuff, like some minimum content requirement for, you know, every bottle made has to be at least X% post-consumer recycled material, for example. So bottles, tubs, jugs, and jars. You can see all my bottles, tubs, jugs, and jars here. The main question that I always get asked is about caps, and that's something that's changed over time just because of plastic markets. So you can see that all the little caps here are screwed on. They're still attached to their bottle, tub, jug, or jar container. That's what we want. So we can have, if you have plastic on plastic, then they can go through the recycling facility together. So even if it's like, you know, here on the little red cap on the green bottle, they're probably 2 separate types of plastic, but it's fine if it's plastic on plastic. You can see the peanut butter jar, that one is about 2 inches. So that one could go on the jar or by itself, just because it's big enough to pass over our crack. The difference between the little bottle caps in that one and a yogurt tub lid, for example, is just the size. So again, we just don't want a tiny little guy going through by himself, because it'll fall through the crack and contaminate the glass. So if you have a tiny little guy, you can attach it to plastic. You can put them through together. If you have something that will pass over the 2-inch crack by itself, like a yogurt tub lid, that can go through separately. Again, with all of our containers, it doesn't need to be sparkling clean. You don't need to scrub it with hot water. You don't need to put it through the dishwasher. Just do your best to, like, eat whatever was in it. You know, peanut butter, you know, use a spatula, give it to your dog, something like that. If there's a little bit of residue, that's totally fine. We just don't want, like, you know, everyone has recycled their papers perfectly, and then somebody recycled a yogurt tub full of yogurt and it went ksh, and then it spilled yogurt all over the stuff. And then we couldn't recycle any of the paper. So bottles, tubs, jugs, and jars is going to be our mantra for plastics. It's our kind of the bulk of plastics that we see in the recycling center. And then we got these optical sorters, I think 2 years ago. So we used to sort plastics by hand. You know, we just like be standing there in front of the conveyor belt and be like, bottle, tub, jug, jar, and everything is moving really quickly, and it's really hard to grab stuff and do it efficiently. So now we have these sorters that are lasers, and they're very cool. So we have one for each type of plastic that we're looking for. So if I'm a laser that's looking for a number 1 plastic, every time a number 1 plastic comes on the conveyor belt, I'm gonna go pichoo and identify it as a number 1. And then I'll trigger a little puff of air so that that number 1 will be traveling along until it hits this like edge here. And then a tuft of air will be like, pew, and then it'll shoot the number 1 into a higher tube, and everything else will fall down into a lower tube. And that's how we sort out the plastics now, which is so cool. So I'm gonna try to play the video. I hope it works. If not, I can send it out later. Wow. Okay, so you can see it in slow motion now. You can see some stuff falling and some stuff shooting up. So like that bottle just got shot up because it's a number 1. That berry container goes choo because it's a number 1. That Dasani bottle, all of that stuff is getting shot up because it's being identified as a number 1. Everything else is falling down. And then it'll go through several more lasers to sort for things like number 2 plastics now. So because of that, I can send this out anyway because I like to watch it all the time because it's incredibly cool to me anyway. So now because of that laser upgrade, we can take other plastics besides bottle, tub, jug, and jar. So we still want bottles, tubs, jugs, and jars, but now we can take clamshells and takeout containers. So pretty much any big, you know, durable plastic container, whether it's hinged, like the lid goes like this, like a berry container, or it fully comes off, like a takeout, like this black takeout container here. We didn't used to be able to take tub lids because when we're wearing our big gloves in the sorting facility, we can't grab something flat and small like a tub lid as it goes across our conveyor belt. But now, since we do it with lasers, we can take that. So again, whether something is recyclable or not doesn't necessarily depend on the product itself. It depends on facilities and markets. So again, bottles, tubs, jugs, and jars, takeout containers, clamshells, tub lids, and then we can take pill bottles as well, which is a bottle. But again, labels are fine, stickers are fine. Just make sure there's not a bunch of food in it. And then rigid plastics, this is something that we could always take at the Center for Hard to Recycle Materials, the CHARM, which is right across the street from the recycling center, and we run both of them. So we were like, if it fits in your bin, you can put it in the bin, and we'll just have to take it off the line before it like jams up our machinery later on. So we can take those hard flower pots. We can take the hard six-pack holders, so not the like stretchy, you know, turtleneck ones, but the solid ones. We can take things like little plastic toys, plastic crates, and buckets. So if you're on your way to the CHARM, you can still bring them to the CHARM, but if it fits in your bin, you can just put it in your bin at this point. Those are a number 2 plastic, usually, if you're interested in that. And then here's our dirty dozen. So with recycling, we always say, when in doubt, throw it out. At EcoCycle, we say, when in doubt, give us a shout, because we do have full-time people manning the phones and the emails. So you can always like send us pictures or give us a call and ask us your questions. But for these ones, we're like, so please don't put anything in the recycling that you don't know is recyclable. We call it wish cycling, when people are like, I don't know if it's recyclable, but I hope it is, so I'm gonna put it in the recycling bin. So we don't like wish cycling, but we have this specific dirty dozen because we're like, if anything, please do not put these things in. So it's either things that we see frequently enough that we have to call them out specifically, or things that are hazardous enough that we're like, do not give us, you know, like a syringe. Don't give us a syringe because we have real people sorting through your stuff. So the number 1 contaminant for recycling is food and liquid. So that's just because, again, we have real people working in the facility. So, sorry, a mail truck is passing and it's very loud. So When I described that yogurt container spilling all over the papers, that's a good reason why to not give us food, because the markets won't buy paper that are covered in yogurt. But also just because we have real people in there. When you give us, you know, a hamburger wrapped in aluminum foil, then it attracts rats, it attracts, you know, wasps and stinging insects, and then our workers will get sick from mold, because the mold will grow for sure. So don't give us food and liquid. Again, a tiny bit of residue is totally fine. Just like, don't give us, you know, just make sure your stuff is empty. And then our other number one contaminant is plastic bags. People love to recycle plastic bags because they have the recycling symbol on them. But plastic bags are a huge problem in our recycling facility and in any given recycling facility, because we have all these moving gears and wheels and pieces of machinery that are moving around and dynamic and turning and churning. And when you give us a plastic bag, it just goes whoop, it just jams it right up really efficiently. It just gets in there and stops everything. So twice a day, at least in our facility, we have to shut everything down, like just shut the whole thing down. And then somebody has to climb into the machine and try to cut out all the plastic bags and drag them out. And it's really scary to watch. It's like, there's a bunch of sharp things and a person has to be in there. So we really don't want plastic bags in the regular facility. You can take plastic bags to a special plastic bag recycling container or collection. So like the Charm, you know, Longmont has the diversion center, a bunch of grocery stores have it. And that will get turned into Trex decking. That's the market for it. So like that composite kind of lumber, that's where it goes. But we don't want it in the regular recycling because it jams up our stuff. Foam, polystyrene, styrofoam stuff, we don't want it. We can't recycle it. We don't want it to exist. I always equate styrofoam with like, you know, smoking on planes, or like letting our babies roll around in the back seat. It's just like something that we used to do because we didn't really know better, and now we know better. So it's just this very weird thing to see in current society. So we're always working on legislation to get rid of, you know, styrofoam coffee cups, because they're disastrous for the planet and for our health. Plastic cups, this is a really confusing one, because a plastic cup does not feel much different from something like a bottle, tub, jug, or jar. It feels kind of durable, you know, it's a container. But the thing with plastic cups is that there's just no consistency in what sort of plastic they make it out of. So I keep using tubs as an example, but a yogurt tub is almost always a number 5. So if I, as a recycler, say, give us your yogurt tubs, I know that I'm gonna get a number 5. But with plastic cups, they just make it out of all of them. Oops. They just make them out of every different resin all the time, with no consistency. So we never know what we're gonna get, but we also know that we're gonna get, if we say, you know, put your cups in the recycling, we're gonna get the paper coffee cup, we're gonna get the styrofoam coffee cup, we're gonna get the soda cup, the compostable cup, the mug, the smoothie, the straw, the ice, the lid, all the contaminants that we don't want. So it's just not worth the contamination. And then furthermore, even if it is empty, plastic cups usually have an additive to make them super brittle. So like, think about a Solo cup, how brittle that is. If it goes through our truck and then our facility, it's just going to shatter into a million pieces, and then we can't, you know, recover those tiny little pieces. So we don't want cups unless they're these very specific, we call them souvenir cups, and you get them at a baseball game. It's like a big gulp. It's this lemonade guy right here. You know, you can tell the difference. It's very durable. You can knock on it. You can squeeze it without it breaking. You can put it through the dishwasher, whatever. That's the type that we can take just because it is very durable and we know it's going to be a 2 or a 5. But otherwise, we don't want cups. These are the plastic coated papers that we talked about. If it's doing a good job of holding your food or liquid directly against it, it's not doing a good job of being a marketable paper product. Lotion and toothpaste tubes are usually an unmarketable plastic, like a 3. Plus, they're not durable. You can bend them around, and they're usually full of, you know, toothpaste or lotion. So we can't take that. These soft, stretchy 6-pack rings, we all have seen pictures of them, you know, around wildlife's neck. We can't recycle them. That will also tangle up our machinery in a big way. The only thing to do there, if you can't avoid it, is just to cut it up so it doesn't get around somebody's neck, and throw it away. Frozen food boxes is a very confusing one, because a frozen food box looks an awful lot like something like a cereal box. A cereal box is recyclable, but a frozen food box, the difference is that it is designed to live in the freezer. So it has this added poly, like spray-on coating that's there to protect it from freezer burn. So even if the product inside is like wrapped in its own little plastic thing, that box specifically is designed to have this like protective layer for freezer burn. And for that reason, it is not recyclable, even though it will often say something like, please recycle, or, you know, have the recycling symbol on it. So we don't want frozen food boxes. Latex gloves, hazardous materials, sharps, medical waste, please don't give us any of that. Again, we have real people working in our facility, and we, you know, we get that sort of thing all the time, but we really, really, really wish we didn't. Again, there's a hazardous materials management facility right beside the recycling center, and it's free for Boulder County and Broomfield residents, so you can, you know, bring in all your stuff and dispose of it for free in a responsible way. Scrap metal is very recyclable. It's valuable stuff, but if you gave us this engine pictured here, or even like a, you know, coat hangers or something like that, it's just going to ruin our machinery. You can imagine how much that would just like cut up our conveyor belts. So scrap metal, you can take it to the Charm, you can take it to the Longmont Diversion Center, any, you know, there's a bunch of scrap metal buyers all over the place. So please recycle it, but don't put it in the recycling by itself, please. Shredded paper, we already talked about. And then drinking glasses, it's kind of an extra credit one. It's not as huge of a deal as the rest of the stuff, but the difference is just that your glass, your drinking glass, is designed to withstand the heat of a dishwasher, and your beer bottle is not. So it's like single-use glass versus durable glass. So if we sent both of them to our glass recycler and they melted them down, your vase or your drinking glass or whatever it is would be, it would just maintain it would be a chunk, it wouldn't melt down. So you can take ceramics, porcelain, and plate glass to the Charm, but if you break your vase or your drinking glass, you kind of just have to throw it in the trash. Okay, and then compost is our last thing to talk about. Whew, running out of time, I always get swept away. I love trash talk. So compost is much easier to talk about because it doesn't have all these different rules. It's not very complicated. So here in Boulder County, we are very lucky to have a local industrial composter that can take things that your backyard couldn't take. So it's called A1 Organics. And anytime you put something in the compost bin around Boulder County, it will go to A1 Organics. So compost has a huge climate implication. So currently we're putting all of our, well, most of us around the country, around the world, are putting all of our organics, so like food waste, yard waste, you know, wood, paper products, etc., into the landfill. And most people think that those organics materials in the landfill will just break down. And I always just say, those are great at breaking down, but pretty much the only thing that they need to do that is oxygen. And landfills are designed specifically to be airtight. That's just how they're designed, because they want to tamp everything down and leave no space unfilled. So when these organics are put in the landfill, rather than breaking down like we want them to, they break down very, very, very slowly. And then in the process, they just release methane. So not only are they really not breaking down, but they're cranking out methane, which is one of the most powerful greenhouse gases, especially in the short term. And we really want to be controlling methane. So we really don't want that to be happening. So if we could take all of our organics out of the landfill, then not only would the landfills be half as full, so pretty much any given landfill is about 50% organics. So all of our landfills could be like half as full, but also they wouldn't be emitting methane because organics are the only thing in the landfill emitting methane. And then if we could put those organics in the compost, then they would break down. They would break down into compost, which is, you know, productive soil amendments, which could then grow new, healthier food, which is like real recycling. You know, that's the planet's real process of recycling. And then when we apply that compost to soils, we can actually draw carbon out of the atmosphere. We can sequester carbon, which is what we talk about when we talk about carbon farming. So it's with organics, it's like really the different, like with compost, it's really like black and white rather than recycling, which is kind of like a stepping stone to the real solution. Composting though is like, do you want to fill up the landfills and emit methane, or do you want to grow new food and draw carbon out of the atmosphere? It's really black and white. So we really need to get on composting. Here are our guidelines. Again, they're much easier than the recycling guidelines. The tricky one is over here on the left, the compostable paper, the dark and bright colored paper. If you have a piece of paper that is very dark or very bright all the way through, the paper recyclers don't love it because when they go to put it in their paper smoothie, it's like a red sock in the whitewash. It'll just bleed its dye everywhere. So we would rather you compost that type of paper. The low grade papers that I talked about are here in the compost guidelines. We have coffee grounds and filters as well. Cardboard, if you can recycle it, great, like, you know, your regular cardboard box. But if you have it in the form of a pizza box, it's covered in cheese and grease, go ahead and compost it instead. So I usually tear in half my pizza box, so the top can be recycled, the bottom can be composted. And then food and plants, anything that you could eat, could grow, did eat. Was it alive? Is it not covered in plastic now? Then it's fine in the compost. The one that surprises people about this is the meat and bones, because it's going to a big old facility where things get very, very hot. It will break down things like bones, meat, eggs, fish, no problem. Avocado pits, all that stuff that you would have trouble with in your backyard compost. And then the certified compostable products, these guys on the left usually won't have much labeling, but you can feel that they're rough and uncoated like an egg carton. You can feel that there's no plastic lining on them. They're usually made of sugar cane pulp, so we want that in the compost. And then these certified compostable products here on the right, like a cup or a fork, they're usually made of corn plastic. So if given the choice between a reusable and this single-use compostable, we always say reusable, because even if it's compostable, it's still linear. You know, anytime you use something for like 5 seconds and then throw it somewhere, it doesn't make sense. Plus, often, you know, these are coming out all over the place in a lot of places where they don't have access to a curbside composting program. So, you know, I just went to Frisco and they gave me a smoothie in a compostable cup, but it has to go in the landfill because they don't have compostable infrastructure there. So it's important, if you are going to do that, that you have actually a compost bin to put it in. And then the last confusing thing about this is that you have to look out for greenwashing. So if you see something like a plastic bag that says biodegradable, that is a big red flag that it's greenwashing. It's just anything is biodegradable. Like, it just means it'll kind of break apart over time. Biodegradable usually means that it'll just break down into microplastics even quicker than it would otherwise, which is a big old negative thing. The thing you want to look for is BPI certified. So that's the company that certifies compostability. If it says BPI certified compostable, if it has this logo on it, then you can put it in the compost with knowing that you're putting in the right place. The last confusing thing is just this number 7. So I said 7 is a crappy plastic. We don't want you to buy it. It's not recyclable. 7 is the other category, like I said. So when they came out with corn plastics, they were like, well, it looks enough like plastic that we have to give it a number, but it's like, it's something else, so put it in the 7 category. So people love to recycle it because now it has the recycling symbol on it. So the difference is, this is too confusing, don't worry about it, but if it's just 7, if it just says 7 and nothing else, or it says 7PC or 7 other, that's the type of plastic that is crappy and you want to throw it away, you want to avoid it. If it says 7PLA specifically underneath, then that means that it's a corn plastic and you can compost it. So this BPI certified corn plastic stuff will have a 7PLA on the bottom, but if it doesn't have a PLA, then that 7 is not a good thing. So that is our last bit. We just have zero waste facilities. So I talked about the charm already. Hazardous materials, Boulder County Recycling Center, and resource are all in the same little block. So that's a great place to get rid of your hard to recycle things. And then we also have an A to Z guide on our website. So anytime you think of a question, you can send it to me, but you can also put it in our little search bar here. We also have an app called EcoCycle A to Z, and you can just be like, yoga mat, and it'll tell you what to do with it. And I know I just monologued for a long time, and I have 1 minute left, so sorry about that. I couldn't see questions coming in, but I can stick around for questions.
Rosie, wow, that was phenomenal. There was so much information. I feel like I'm a very educated recycler, and I learned so much today from you. If you want to stop sharing your screen, there are some questions, and I know I shared some that went privately to Stu, and I got some privately too. So I'll go through the list and read them to you if that's okay. And we'll stick around for a couple more minutes to answer some questions if that's okay for everybody. But if you have to go, I want you to know we will be sending out a recording of this presentation with all of the slides. So if you miss something, you can watch it again or share it with friends, because I don't know how you feel. I think everyone should have this information. So I'm going to just start from the top. And this was a question that I'm still not totally clear about. Wrapping paper that you would wrap presents with. can you recycle it? Would that be composting?
That is a great one. Definitely an FAQ around the holidays. So the thing with wrapping paper is that the fiber is very low grade. Nobody really wants to buy it, but it's often mostly clay. The clay content in wrapping paper is very, very high. So they don't want it in the regular recycling. You can usually compost it if it doesn't have like glitter or like shiny stuff on it. But I always save mine for the holidays because around the holidays we do have special wrapping paper collections all over the county, and we have to do a combination of composting and basically like peppering it into our regular recycling stream so that they count it as a contaminant, but they'll still process it if the rate is low enough. So anyway, I usually keep it for the holiday collections because that's probably the easiest thing to do. But like reusing it and making your own out of newspaper and things like that is always fun too.
So no glitter. Don't get any wrapping paper with glitter because that can't be recycled at all, even in the holidays.
Yeah.
Okay, good to know. I do try and recycle mine. Let's see. Last time checked, I will not take old, Best Buy will not take old electronics. Does that still go to Charm, like old computer desktops?
Yeah, so electronics recycling is one of the ones where like the producer responsibility should be a no-brainer, but it's not really happening right now. So currently at the Charm, we will pay for a lot of it, and then the consumer has to pay to recycle it. So it's like 59 cents a pound, I think, to recycle it. The cool thing is that at the Charm, we partner with Blue Star Recyclers, who specifically employ adults with autism. So it's a really cool social enterprise and environmental advocacy kind of partnership there. But yeah, unfortunately, we still have to pay for it. So we're still always working on funding there and putting the onus on the producers. But yeah, I'm always a little bit skeptical when there's like a free, electronics recycling collection because they have to pay for it. So it's interesting if somebody offers it. I'm always a little bit curious what they're doing with it. So anyway, the Charm is the only place I can really, I know what happens to it. It all stays local. It's responsibly taken apart. We have the highest environmental stewardship and social stewardship certification. But it sure is a tricky one. And also in Colorado, it's illegal to throw them in the trash. So it's really hard it's an equity issue too.
Yay, Colorado. And the link to the movie, The Story of Plastics, you mentioned, you would share that? Is that something we can share with everybody on the talk? Is that something we could share on social media also to spread the word?
Yeah, I can send you a link. It's like EcoCycle is like hosting it, but basically you just sign up and then we'll send you the link and then you can watch it on your own time, and it expires the 31st. But it's heavy, it's not happy, but it's a lot of people that we work with all the time, and it's powerful.
So this month until the 31st, people can stream it.
Yes, okay. And I'll send that to you as soon as I hang up.
Okay, great, thank you. How about the black plastic containers? Okay, I think you did mention that from Chinese restaurants, that would be that is acceptable now to be recycled.
If it's a hard plastic kind of Tupperware takeaway thing, it's not styrofoam, then that's okay. Black plastic in general is tricky just because once it's black, it can't really be recycled into another color easily. So the more you can kind of avoid black plastic, the better. But obviously, if you have no choice and it is that durable takeaway container type, then we can recycle it.
What about if our compost bins are full and we still have a bunch of yard waste? Where can we take those?
So we do have, Western Waste Management has their own, so their Western's yard waste facility is right behind our facility. So it's still on Recycle Row there. And you can take yard waste there, you can take like wood waste there. And then Charm also has a compost drop off. So like if you don't have access to curbside composting, for example, you can bring by your little compost bucket to the Charm and we'll take it in our dumpster there.
Oh, great. That was the next question. If they don't have curbside compost, take it to Charm. Let's see. What's the best way to store my composting inside the kitchen? What do most people use?
So at this point, there's so many different options for bins. My compost bin is much bigger than my trash bin at this point. So I have like one of those ones where you step on it and it kind of locks the bag together so it's not stinky. But you can also, like, you know, you can use like a salad container if you want. And often if it's something like that, if you put it in the freezer, that's a great thing to do, because then it won't smell, like it'll stop the kind of decomposition. So if you put it in a compostable bag or a yogurt tub or a salad container or something like that, the freezer is a great hack for storing it in your kitchen if you don't want to like buy one of the real compost bins that sometimes can be expensive.
Let's see. What about the plastic used to encase products that is very common at Costco? There's a mega plastic facility being constructed in Penn with government support. Do you know about this?
Is it like the shrink wrap kind of thing?
Jerry, do you have some clarification on that?
Costco is terrible about having everything they sell encased in this hard, clear plastic. There's no number on the plastic.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's double layered, it's triple layered. I'm assuming it's not recyclable, but it's horrendous. And I don't know if it is recyclable.
So it's the type that's like, it's kind of like shaped to the thing, and it's like,
yeah, it's molded to whatever it is. Yeah.
But you can knock on it. It's hard though.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So that
I have cut myself on it.
Yeah, it's hard. So that is a great example again of why we can't do it by number. So what you're describing is usually a number 1 PETE, like a bottle. But the reason that it's not recyclable when a bottle is recyclable is because it's molded to that shape. So it's what we call a thermoform. And so whenever they mold it, like, you know, if you buy a pack of scissors and it has like the shape of the scissors on the package, or like apples, that kind of thing. It's when it's molded to the shape like that, it's like a different chemical makeup and a different melting point. And the number 1 PETE, people won't buy that. So that thermoform, even though it's a number 1, whether or not it has a number on it, is trash, which is so infuriating because, yeah, Costco could be like, cool, bulk. You know, we like bulk buying, but then they encase everything in plastic and then.
I know, it's very frustrating.
You know,
the other thing I put down is just a comment. I think it's outside of Pittsburgh, where they're doing a lot of fracking.
Yeah.
There's one of the oil companies with government subsidy is building a plastic-only facility for fracking. I don't know if you're familiar with that or not.
I don't know that specific one, but yeah, that's what I was saying with that if you watch the story of plastics, that's one of their kind of like focuses, is like, we're doing a great job kind of moving away from fossil fuels in a bunch of different aspects of our society. And so then the fossil fuel industry is like, okay, so let's push plastic harder than ever. And that's one that's really hard to get away from, especially in kind of developing countries. We have to buy everything in a little like satchel. So they're getting all these, subsidies and tax breaks and stuff in the time of COVID specifically too. So yeah, it's like really important to make that connection between those two industries, because it really is the same one, and it's a big nut to crack.
Rosie, this information has been so wonderful, but I'm wondering, how can we advocate to end the stream of plastic and to put the onus on the producers? What do you have any tips for us?
Yeah, so that's what the Eco Leader Network is. Basically, that's what I run as part of my job. So it's just basically a bunch of 1,000 plus people who are concerned about the environment, and in whatever way makes sense for them. They can continue education like I've shared with you today. They can get trained on how to spread the word. They can be volunteers. They can help us lobby. There's a whole bunch of different ways to be involved, and I can send you a link to that sign up as well. Just if you also, even if you're not looking for that, if you subscribe to the general Eco Cycle newsletter, we have anytime we need you to write to your legislator in support of a bill that we've just introduced, we'll send you that kind of template, and you can just put in your name and we'll figure out who your representative is and things like that. I, personally, as a consumer, I try really hard to kind of vote with my dollar. So not only being conscious of what I'm buying, but, writing to companies that may not know that their packaging isn't recyclable, or it's harmful or whatever. So, Ratty Mermaid is a local company, and they were shrink wrapping their cans in plastic rather than just printing the label on the can. And so I had a bunch of eco leaders write to them and be like, it makes it unrecyclable, it makes it hard, like take it off, take the wrap off, and then they did. So things like that, even if it seems small, are really important. And then we're also doing a lot of work on Plastic Free July. It's Plastic Free July, if you didn't know. It's a specific month where it's kind of a movement to cut out single-use plastic specifically. And so we're putting out a lot of content at EcoCycle on our social media, but also you can sign up for the Plastic Free July challenge, and you'll get kind of like a different kind of challenge and piece of information every day. Really, the more you get into this plastics world, the more there is to learn and the more there is to do. But it is, again, it's very daunting, and I think it's always important, again, if you watch the movie, to keep in mind it's not on us. Like, it's not the consumer's fault that you forgot to refuse a plastic straw. It's not our fault that this is happening. And it's much more an infrastructure problem, and it's much more big picture than they want us to think. So I think anytime you can advocate on the larger scale and like work on legislation and write to your representatives and things like that is really a powerful thing to do.
Rosie, thank you so much. I feel really empowered with all of this information, and I didn't know that this was Plastic Free July, and so I'm already thinking about doing this program again next year, right before July, and keep spreading this word. And being informed and sharing this information is so important. So thank you so much for being here, and thank you all for joining us. I hope you can join us again for our program this Sunday for a tribute for Carl Reiner, the last of a nearly extinct breed of Borscht Belt comic geniuses who once ruled the American comedy universe. This is going to be presented by Catherine Bernheimer at 4 o'clock this Sunday, and we'd love to see you all again. Again, I'm going to stay on if anybody else has any last questions, but we're going to turn off the camera. And thank you so much, Rosie, for being here. This was a wonderful presentation.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.